From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his shall be the song of ice and fire. Aegon the Conqueror. Based on the novel Fire and Blood from the world of A Song of Ice and Fire by author George R.R. Martin, House of the Dragon is set in the fictional kingdom of Westeros and follows the beginning of what is essentially the Targaryen Civil War, although it goes on to impact the world as they know it in irreversible ways, ultimately leading to what would be the fall of the Targaryen dynasty and the end of dragons. The show is done by Ryan Condal and George R.R. Martin himself, who are actually friends, which made me happy considering what happened with Benioff and Weiss and the end of Game of Thrones. It was said George hand-selected Condal himself, although his blog states that he is currently no longer interested in attending writing rooms for season 3. I was initially glad to see George really hands-on and was excited to see he gave the rough cuts the green light. Season 1 was well received and season 2 was a mixed bag. But for me, out of all of the time periods in A Song of Ice and Fire, I was surprised to see that Dance of Dragons was HBO's next adaptation, only because those of us who have read the books know pretty much what happens, or at least we thought. But it wouldn't have been my first pick. I was hoping we'd get something like Old Valyria Before the Doom or Aegon's Conquest. However, once I saw the trailer and saw Olivia Cooke, whom I adore, had been casted as Alicent, I knew I wanted to watch it. And while the show definitely has its weak spots, I overall thoroughly enjoyed both seasons, and it reminded me of how much I love this world George R.R. Martin's beautiful brain has created. So today, that's what this video is talking about. I wanted to zoom out and focus on an overarching theme that is ever present in the George R.R. Martin universe. It's one we see at play heavily in season 2 of House of the Dragon, one that impacts familial dynamics in irrevocable ways. I'm talking about a psychiatric theory called second son syndrome, more specifically known as the Cain complex. In order to understand the basis for this video, let's go back to one of psychology's most controversial figures, Sigmund Freud. Most famous for his psychiatric theories, Freud speculated that the destruction of the father in a patriarchal society is a man's true nature, based on evolution. And he further theorized that because of this, the love of his mother would always remain semi-erotic and wounded. You've probably heard of the Oedipus and Oedipus complex, both of which he was heavily criticized and taken to task for. However, what this video focuses on is an offshoot of his ideas, a post-Freudian theory of aggression developed by the Hungarian psychoanalyst Leopold Sonzi. It considers how these theories appropriate a biblical myth of fratricide rather than the classical myth of patricide, and examines the power structures between multi-generational male relationships. So what does any of that mean? Well, unlike Freud, Sonzi theorized that the father wasn't a source of a man's anger and envy, but it was actually his brother, as said man would always be compared to his older or younger brother, and the two would be in lifelong competition to win their family's approval and continue on as the head patriarch of the family. The name finds itself from the biblical story of Cain and Abel, the two twins of Adam and Eve, and the first human children to be born on earth after the banishment from Eden. And it's actually Cain who came out first. The story goes both boys were basically polar opposites. I found this description that essentially sums up the difference between the two. Though they looked alike, the two sons differed more radically in moral character. Cain developed wicked traits. He was energetic, ambitious, resourceful, a man who made his mark in the world, a builder of cities, a leader in civilization, but a man of bad temper. Selfish, morose, cruel, hard, and resentful. Abel, on the other hand, was quiet, affectionate, and patient. The world now would call him easygoing, not disposed to stand up for his rights, meek and often allowing others to trample over him and tread him down to the dust. But what do Cain and Abel have to do with House of the Dragon? Well, their story continues as follows. The two brothers go to a lush field to make an offering before God. Abel's is received and Cain's is rejected. After this, Cain is angry. He's put out. But he's not upset at his rejection, cursing God and forsaking his name. In fact, it said Cain was angrier at his brother. He is embarrassed and envious, and he allows these feelings to fester, allowing the years of childhood comparison and critique to bubble up to the surface, leading Cain to take Abel's life in an act of revenge. Because, you see, Cain saw his father, his heavenly father's disapproval, as a comparison to his brother, instead of his own shortcomings. Cain's ego does not allow him to reflect internally, only to produce indignation at perceived injustices. The consistent comparing of the two boys, so similar they shared the same DNA, led to a power dichotomy, one where they existed as perfect foils, good and evil. But the theory is more expansive, goes farther than just kinslaying. Every person in a patriarchal society has a role to play in what happens to Abel, no one more so than Adam and Eve themselves. Already being evicted from the Garden of Eden after eating from the Tree of Knowledge, the pair know full well the dangers of existing in black and white, declaring one thing to be good and another bad, despite how you must engage with said former thing. The same thing can be said for kings and queens. On House of the Dragon, Alicent and Viserys are fully aware of what power does to a person. Heavy is the head in all of that. Viserys was thrust upon the throne after the usurpation of his cousin at the Great Council. For all intensive purposes, he, Daemon, and their parents should have gone on to live a great life together. Yet the gods would have other cruelties in mind. Viserys' willingness to sacrifice all that he had for a crown that was never his ultimately was his undoing. In pursuit of an heir, the death to Aemma left open the door for Alicent. And the same can be said for her. The righteous indignation Alicent feels towards Rhaenyra's perceived freedoms causes her to lead her children astray. She encourages dissension, and by doing that widens the divide. Both parents are acutely aware of how quickly families can disintegrate, yet neither will do the hard thing to bridge the gap. Viserys at one point calling Rhaenyra his only child. And so, because of this, their sons suffer. When we meet Aegon and Aemond, they are the perfect snapshot of Cain and Abel. Aegon is brash, cruel, and frequently bullies Aemond, who, in his youth, is quite docile, considerate, and sensitive. Aegon ostracizes his brother and triangulates those around him. It's Aegon who truly severs the relationship between Luke, Jacaerys, and Aemond, often goading them into bullying and disparaging him, which I believe is what leads him to claim Vhagar. No longer interested in being a weak, unbonded dragon rider, Aemond risks life and limb for the chance at power, the chance to be like his brother, and in return he is punished for this choice, immediately with the loss of his eye. And it's here we see the beginning of Aemond's transformation from Abel to Cain, the claiming of his dragon, the metaphorical death of the softness inside of him. And Aegon knows it. Two Cains existing in the world, throwing off the balance of ice and fire in the way that dragons never could. Made all the more worse by their parents' refusal to intervene and mitigate the situation. With Aemond claiming Vhagar, the power dynamics in their family have shifted. The crown, however, does not follow suit, especially when Alicent rejects Rhaenyra's proposal and betroths Helena to Aegon. Because Sansa didn't stop at the father. He also theorized that Cain's envy extended to his brother's wife, who was said to be the most beautiful of all the women alive. But here's the thing. Both brothers were married to twin sisters, quite similar to the Targaryen custom of interfamilial marriage. And unlike Cain and Abel, the two were said to be identical in both beauty and disposition. Yet Cain still coveted what was not his, and from this imagined false narratives of how he was cheated out of the better wife and the better life. His desire for her planted a seed in his head that grew over time, leading him to often make drastic decisions out of anger and not logic. And there's nothing more dangerous than a man who feels the one he loves' affection is withheld at the behest of another man. And yes, I'm talking to you, Daemon Targaryen, the other second son this video focuses on, but more on him later. Because you see, unlike his uncle, Aemond isn't one of the lucky second sons. He is the parentified child. In his youth, Alicent often lent on him for support, as well as to enforce order. Aemond existed as the safety net for his family, and by extension the realm. As long as he rides Vhagar, he can keep the Green safe. Yet in return, Aegon is given everything Aemond deserves, despite his unworthiness. Aemond has to stand by and fill in the gaps where Aegon repeatedly falls short. He essentially walks around with the sign above his head, saying anything Aegon can do, I can do better, even admitting losing his eye was worth gaining his dragon. Although we see how inferior it makes him feel to others, and how he overcompensates as he ages. Aemond becomes a fierce warrior, even beating Sir Criston Cole in a sword fight as a teenager. He speaks fluent High Valyrian, even going so far as to use Aegon's lack of fluency in the Old Tongue against him. And on the surface, like Cain, he would have you believe he feels no inferiority towards his brother, only something close to contempt. But I have another opinion. Aemond losing his eye branded him for life. It's a story he can never escape because the scar exists on his face and the audience exists inside his head. For all his power and wit, Aemond is doomed to this destiny. Westerosi beauty standards are fickle and vain. Vhagar and the scar that won her exist only as a reminder to the small folk that Aemond is not to be trusted. In fact, he is to be feared, to be avoided. And this is the same way God punished Cain. In the biblical retelling after the slaying of Abel, which would be the first murder on earthly soil, Cain is given a brand by God and forced to walk the earth for all eternity, so that everywhere he may go, people know the face of a murderer, a kinslayer. And such is the life of Aemond. His ego and pride drive him to make so many feeling-based decisions, ultimately proving, like his brother, he is unfit to sit the throne. When Aemond is chasing Luke above Storm's End, he's being reckless. He has studied Targaryen history, and he knows Vhagar's past, fully what she is capable of. So why poke a sleeping bear? In the moment before it happens, Aemond almost seems panicked, at one point speaking in English instead of High Valyrian. Something fans have speculated might allude to Luke's murder being unintentional, but blood is spilled nonetheless. The same can be said for Rook's Rest. For all his false bravado, Aegon Targaryen is still king, and Sunfire is still a baby. Aemond, like Cain in the field, saw the potential for his glory to be diminished, wrestling with his desire for vengeance. In the end, the latter won. Intentionally burning Aegon at Rook's Rest for me marks the third and final action that completes Aemon's transformation into Cain. Although he doesn't manage to succeed in killing Aegon, he destroys his spirit, and the man who raised them both like a father, Criston Cole, knows exactly what happened. No longer can Aemond masquerade as Abel, and it's here that Luke comes back, his death coming into clarity. Because it's fitting for this house that the incident which led to the Dance of Dragons was an age-old argument between two second sons, simply doing what their mothers told them to do. And although many think it's a myth Targaryens control their dragons, I'd say I don't know if I believe that's true. Aside from everything we know about magic in Old Valyria and Dany being the mother of dragons, Vhagar did not hesitate when Aemond gave the command, no matter the dialect. They both spoke the same language. And I think Vhagar did what she did because it's what Aemond wanted her for power, for glory, for war. I just don't think he thought it would be against his baby nephew, but perhaps his older brother. And speaking of older brothers, Daemon Targaryen, come to the mic. In one of Daemon's earliest scenes, we see Corlys telling him that as the second sons, their worth must be made, as it is not given, highlighting the fact that in the eyes of most people, a king's second son or daughter is nothing but a child. Ever heard the phrase, the heir and despair? In traditional monarchies, the eldest boy is number one priority, because it's him who will be king one day. And so from the moment they're born, they're educated and groomed to be a ruler. That special attention placed on a sibling, coupled with the knowledge that the only way you could ever receive that level of attention is if they were to die, would plant seeds in the heads of even the loyalest of men. Couple that with the pressure cooker of a looming succession crisis, and you have the frustrations of Daemon Targaryen. Here is a loyal brother, a fierce warrior, someone who lost his mother and father when he was quite young. He's a member of the King's Guard, captain of the Gold Cloaks, an amazing dragon rider, and an exceptional swordsman. Yet he is not king, and he is not heir, although, like Aemond on paper, he should be. For all intents and purposes, Daemon is more fit to be king than Viserys, especially if you take Targaryen prince standards into accord. But like Aemond, it's his belief in this that makes him unfit to sit the throne. But Daemon is unique. In fact, he's much more like childhood Aemond than you'd initially believe. Make no mistake, Daemon is not innocent. He can be calculated, cunning, greedy, a self-serving absentee father, but as Freud and Sanzi both agreed, the desire for power is often masquerading as trauma, presenting as bravado while you cower from the reality of why you desire subservience. Like Aemond, Daemon simply wants his brother's love. Viserys is the last existing link he has to his parents, the one who can tell him what his mother was like, how his father received his moniker the Brave. Furthermore, Viserys is a man others saw fit to be king. He claimed Balerion the Black Dread. He is respected and rules in relative peace. The small folk adore him, especially Aemma Arryn, and his first daughter is the delight of the realm. He's a man whose approval you want, and that is the crux of their issue. Daemon Targaryen is desperate for not only his brother's love, but for his trust. All he wants is to be his hand. In his eyes, Viserys is the shield and Daemon is the sword. It's why he fights so hard in the Stepstones only to publicly denounce his title at court. He's baiting Viserys into reacting, to paying him any attention, and when he does, Daemon rolls over to show his belly, to show there is no threat there. The same can be said when he steals the dragon egg meant for Viserys' son. Daemon allows Rhaenyra to come to Dragonstone and retrieve the egg without bloodshed, allowing the realm to see her as a competent leader who can tame even its fiercest of warriors. But there's a double motivation to his actions, because all the while, Daemon is assuring Viserys he would never raise his blade to Rhaenyra, nor any heir who stood in his way, despite his heir for a day comments. But the catch is, Viserys can't trust Daemon. In fact, at times, he can hardly stand him. Viserys' rejection of Daemon is a mere snapshot of Cain's shame before God, and we see this play out at Harrenhal, this godlike revere Daemon had for his brother. He is overcome with guilt, unable to own his shortcomings or accept reality. In this moment, he is a second son, refusing to believe he isn't owed vassalage. But unlike Cain, like Aemond, Daemon is given divine intervention. Through Alice Rivers, Daemon is allowed to see reality as it stands. Viserys sits, rotting on the throne, a golden face so eerily similar to the Viserys we are yet to meet in Game of Thrones, explaining to Daemon the reality of ruling and what is truly at stake, the salvation of humanity. And this is why Daemon is so changed when he finds out about Aegon's dream. In life, Viserys never told him, meaning he truly had never intended on Daemon being his heir. He sees the destruction of the crown, how it crumples up those around it. His anger, his envy towards Rhaenyra, vanish, because Daemon's visions reveal that his behavior was the only thing preventing him from sitting on the throne. The light and dark no longer wrestle inside him as his path is made clear. In his journey at Harrenhal, both parts of Daemon Targaryen come together to live in harmony and acceptance of his fate. And I said at the beginning this would contain spoilers. Here is where a major one comes. When Helena spoke to Aemon on the balcony, she told him he would be swallowed up beneath the god's eye. What she did not mention was that Daemon Targaryen would plunge Dark Sister through Aemon's only working eye, leaving him and Vhagar to sink to the bottom of the ocean. His body would not be discovered for years to come. Through Alice Rivers, Daemon accepts that for the realm to live, he must die. On his last and final act, Daemon is transformed from Cain to Abel, successfully avoiding the Cain complex cycle. But still, there's Aemond, who is yet to meet his uncle, or most importantly, Alice Rivers. Their child is unborn, and their story still untold. Maybe the battle above the god's eye will prove to be different than Cain and Abel below in his field. Aemon may yet prove destiny wrong, like Daemon. Though, unlike Viserys, Aegon lives, and he sits on his wooden throne, plotting his revenge. But all the while Daemon waits, set free by the knowledge that it could only ever be Rhaenyra, for no second son is coming to save the kingdom. Bye, guys.